Okay, here is another brief chapter from a work in progress called Notes Toward a Book on the Frosts. Whistling tunes we piss on the goons. Peter Gabriel would have had no trouble believing the Lord of the Flies' ambitions of the Frost and Weems boys. Now, a while back I said we didn't put a pig's head on a pike, but that doesn't mean we wouldn't if we could have. My brothers, after all, in imitation of the Angel Records cherub etching a platter with the point of a quill pen, took my parents' classical LPs out of their jackets and protective inner sleeves, and after locking the babysitter in the bathroom, it being a fact that there was a lock on the outside of the bathroom door, put the records on the kitchen floor, although not before spackling the linoleum with Skippy, and sat on them, spinning round and round. I stood on the counter under the shelves in the pantry. I was 3. Bob and Frank were 5 and 7. Mom, coming back to the apartment, had to walk over peanut butter smeared symphonies in order to let the babysitter, who'd been weeping, out of the bathroom. Bob and Billy, around that time, had taken the time to take Dad's hacksaw to the rungs of the A-frame jungle gym Frank and Danny used to climb on. Sawing upwards from the underside of 2 horizontal bars, they were careful not to saw all the way through. Putting the saw carefully away and blowing the sawdust to the 4 corners, Bob and Billy started climbing the unsawed part of the frame, making loud noise as they climbed to the top so that Frank and Danny would hear. As usual, the sound of their brothers playing drew Frank and Danny in. Not that they wanted to play with Bob and Billy. They wanted to throw them off the jungle gym. Shimmying up the tilted sides, one of them stepped on a rung, began lifting himself, and then crashed through. The other, enraged, did the exact same thing. Of course, the crashing through the rungs caused the A-frame to sway, and Bob and Billy fell off. The broken rungs made good throwing objects. My father dismantled the jungle gym that night. Once we moved to Long Island, I spent a lot of time after school standing on various raised surfaces as Frank and Bob chased each other through the house, pinning each other until one admitted to being the aggressor. "You were the aggressor," Frank would say. "No," Bob would answer. "Yes," Frank would say. "No, you were the aggressor," Bob would say. "You will not be let up until you say you are the aggressor." Then Mom would get home and we'd all have to get bags from the car. None of us was the aggressor then. One summer, maybe the summer when Danny almost fell off the roof as a bee stung him during a game of what we called marauders, he and Frank began chasing Bob and Billy through the backyard, the front yard, through the woods, and back to the backyard. This was normal. I was probably on the porch reading Sunday's Fun Day, Charlie Brown. I noticed the 4 of them shimmying up the big maple. I'd gotten stuck in it the first year we were out there. I'd climbed too high and began crying. The neighbors, 6 and 7 years older than I was, climbed up and pulled me down, like a cat the firemen rescue. "You will not escape," I heard Frank calling. I looked up and Bob and Billy were climbing up the tree rapidly. "They're going to try to jump to the sun porch," I heard Danny say. "Impossible," said Frank. "The branches are too thin up there." Frank and Danny always seemed to be living in an episode of Star Trek. Their declarations were meant to be overheard by Bob and Billy, who, of course, were remaining mute as they ascended the higher branches. "They shall climb no further," Frank announced. He and Danny were rather high up the tree themselves now. Charlie Brown was saying "rats," when suddenly I heard a sort of mewling from Frank. "Ah!" said Dan. "Oh, God," said Frank. Lynn, recounting this story almost 20 years later, said, "And Bob and Billy stood up in the highest branch and peed on Frank and Dan. They'd saved it all up, and Frank and Danny are trying to get down without falling. They were halfway up and piss was streaming on them." Facebook comment from Bob. Just for the record, it was Billy's idea, but it was a good one and the timing was perfect.